Well, good evening, everyone. I'd like to offer a warm welcome on behalf of SSGN. We're going to give people some time to join. I just thought I'd give just a couple of minutes background on SSGN's history. SSGN has its foundation in the spirituality and sustainability conferences that were held in Assisi and in Rome, starting in 1991 with Tom Berry, and were arranged by Dr. Elisabetta Ferrero and Dr. Rick Clugston under the auspices of Dr. Joe Iannone of St. Thomas University in Florida. So the SSGN Conversations program is intended to encourage dialogue with distinguished scholars and activists on the root causes of our existential crisis. And it's my pleasure to have with us today my colleague, Ensign Cowell, who is a founding member and of the board of SSGN. So right now we're just going to wait a while. Our speaker is in Denver, Colorado right now, and he's having some technical difficulties, but that won't stop us. We'll keep going until he's able to join. I should say that we'll also be recording this conversation, and we will be placing it on our YouTube channel after we format the program. So once again, a warm welcome, Ensign.
Yes. Is everyone else muted except you and me, Jim?
I think so.
Okay. Well, I think to start off, I just want to show people the cover of the book, and to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about. This is the book by Timothy Beal, who's a professor at Case Western Reserve University. Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland is our liberal arts plus engineering school plus medical school. So it's a very important institution in the Cleveland area. And Timothy Beal and his wife moved to Cleveland, maybe 20 years ago. And then she got a post as a co-pastor of a major Presbyterian church in Denver. And so they have moved to Denver, and Timothy now commutes between Cleveland and Denver. And we think perhaps there may be a time differential problem that's kept him from showing up right now. And we've messaged him and so forth, so we don't know. But let's go on with the show. And first of all, what I'd like to do is unmute everybody and ask who has read the book and or is otherwise familiar with Timothy Beal and his other books, or this book especially. I'd like to have some, can you do that, Natasha? Let everybody open up and, yeah. Because this is billed as a conversation series as opposed to a webinar or a show and tell event. So audience participation is very much in the mix of how we want to do this.
Ensign, are you in Cleveland?
I am in Cleveland for the summer. I'm in Fort Myers in the winter, so we spend about 6 months each place.
I am in Cleveland also, and I'd love to be part of the local community.
Oh, that'd be great. That'd be great. You know, one of our purposes in having these events is to encourage people to become part of SSGN. And SSGN at its founding and all along is about something very, very significant. And that is what we call make it sacred. What we feel, and this book is very much in the vein of examining this question, we've come, at least in European, Western European, and US, to think of the earth as something to take full advantage of and exploit and just have our will with it, and not seeing ourselves in a fragile environment where it's sacred and we have to treat it as sacred, and we have to think of the earth as a precious, fragile biosphere ecosystem. And so what Tim's book is all about is how the interpretation of Genesis and the difference between Genesis 1 and 2, the two versions of creation, and how we've appropriated that to make it through people like Francis Bacon have looked at the earth as something to be exploited and to be as there for men's pleasure, not as humans, as a part of the whole biosphere at which we have to take care of it in a very conscientious and stewardship manner. Now, those of us that are ecologically oriented, of course, that's all we're thinking about is the sacredness and the fragileness, and yet our capitalistic system, which is based on compound growth of extraction and consumption, is not really taking that into account. It's not part of the calculus of the way our economic systems work. We look at GDP, which is a measure of transactions and consumption, and we look for compound growth on a finite planet. So inherently, and the narrative we've grown up with, which Tim's book is all about, is how, this is okay, that somehow we're this exceptionalism of human creatures. It's okay to do anything we want because somehow the earth and the biosphere will provide. And I think those of us who are conscious and who are conscientious and are looking at what's happened since the mid-century, 1950, let's say, and after the war, post-war period, understand that we're on a trajectory and just of having such interference with the ecosystem, with nature, that we risk actual devastation, if not even extinction at worst. And Tim's book is not a doomer book, but it is a very reflective book about what, in fact, if we are already, it may be even too late, okay? And he traces how we get there to this appropriation of biblical text in a way that it made it seem like anything we did was okay from a human standpoint. And I'd like to open it up for comment now, because I've sort of prefaced and set the stage for what the book's all about. And I'd like people to give me, if they've read it or even not read it, give questions or commentary on what I've just put forth.
Good. Obviously, the thing that's driving our programs right now is the linking of the biosphere, if you will, what looks to be outside us, to come to realize that it's not outside us, that all living things, us included, are one and the same. We're all together, every living thing. And this brings in a spiritual sense of where we are. And to look at just cutting down use of oil or other plastics or things like that, that's not enough. We have to have an understanding that where we are and what this whole issue is, it's a strong, involving every living thing, us included. So our role is big and we cannot turn away from it. That's my key thing. Yeah.
Well, I would like to add to that, which I fully agree with, and I haven't read the book, and I'm looking forward to doing that, is whether or not Tim Beal gets into the economic issues associated with the destruction of the natural world, insofar as we live in an economic system that requires continual growth in consumption. Material consumption, of course, uses more and more material resources of the earth, uses more and more energy. How do we get out of that paradigm, a growth paradigm, in order to move into a more sustainable paradigm? I believe the Bible and other religious traditions have the answer to that, which is that we're here to serve one another, not just for our individual well-being. And I'd love to hear more about what Mr. Beal has to say about those things.
Well, you'll note that the subtitle of the book is Finding Our Way in the Anthropocene. And the Anthropocene is defined, we've been in what they call the Holocene era, in terms of epochs, Earth epochs. And the Anthropocene is defined as the period when human influences were so impactful, including, as we know now, climate change, as well as species extinction, as well as pollution, and overfishing, depletion of the soil in terms of its vitality, so its dirt and chemicals. All of these things are the manifestation of the compound growth of extraction and consumption, which is driven by the capital system, which it requires that we have to get growth, we have to get return on investment, we have to keep going. Now, the capitalistic system has delivered, and it's been wonderful, but taken to without any other, what they call in economics, externalities, meaning if we don't measure and cost into the system what the impacts on the biosphere, on the ecosystem, on the natural world are, then we're just flying blind. We're like an airplane that's just flying out with no controls of what the impacts are. And so that's what Tim's book is all about, is reflection on the narratives of the appropriation of biblical texts in a way that did not emphasize the stewardship part and the respectful part of humans being just a part of the natural world that has to live in a way that is compatible, but rather as something that we're the exceptional creatures, the choseness. He talks about exceptionalism and choseness, and how that interpretation, that narrative, has led us to think we can just operate with abandon. And Joe, your observations are absolutely correct. How in the world do we get away, for instance, of measuring progress, not as Bhutan would have it, for instance, the country of Bhutan, gross national happiness, or there's a lot of research work going on now about human flourishing. And what we know, frankly, is that more and more consumption does not lead necessarily to essential happiness or essential flourishing.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's a given. That's a given. So.
Sheila, please. Yeah, I just finished the 9-month deep time leadership course that talked about the 13.8 billion year ever unfolding story of the universe. I worked in labor and delivery at McDonald House more than 50 years ago, when Klaus and Kennel were just starting bonding and attachment studies. And coming from a pre and perinatal psychology educator perspective with this nursing background in childbirth, I want to address the possibility of expanding the existential crisis, or the causes of the existential crisis, with the way we are born, the way we are conceived. Because Barry says that we need to reinvent the human at a species level with critical reflection and in a time developmental context. I believe that time developmental context needs to include prenatal development and consciousness. So the work that I do with this 11th Circuit Labyrinth is using story and shared dream experience to get to understand our own origin stories, our own personal stories of embryogenesis and birth, and ground the behavior for the way forward in the wisdom that we are embodied with from the very beginning.
To be respectful of where we really come from, and what our place in this, in the whole ecosystem is. Yes.
And that's modeled in the undisturbed physiological processes that happen between the mother and the prenate. The mother will actually, if allowed the baby to crawl to the breast, skin to skin, the mother will regulate that baby's temperature, oxygenation levels, heartbeat, brain waves, sleeping patterns, just by being skin to skin with her. So we have to restore that that felt sense, or that embodied sense of being connected to the earth by remembering that wisdom that we were born with.
Beautiful. Wonderful.
Sheila, the Deep Time Network, remind us what that is all about. I've heard of Deep Time Network, but I'm not totally familiar.
Yeah, I found out about it through Carolyn. Oh, I can't remember her name now, but she works a lot with positive approaches to grief during the Anthropocene. And the
Yes.
Deep Time Network course that I just was certified in took us through that history of the evolutionary history of the universe. Brought in Barry and Desjardins and all the other ecozoan reader and all of that material. So I'm able to use that material and ground it. I have training in ecotherapy, and I presented myself at Lake Erie Institute for that training because I wanted to represent the human. Arnie Ness said the ecological self is in and of nature from the very beginning of ourselves, and how that embryo comes into contact with the first learning environment has consequences for lifelong health and wellness.
That's terrific. Hang on one sec. I'm going to take this maybe.
Tim.
Yeah. I'd like others to comment on what Tim is putting forth, not as a doomer. This is not of the genre of uninhabitable Earth or something like that. He's saying, we are far enough along and we're so ingrained with the system that we're doing that it may in fact be already too late. And if it is too late, that we're actually in a very fragile situation where we may be facing, if not extinction, mass trouble, mass die-off, mass species extinction, and so forth. What should be our position? How should we behave? How should we react from the recognition that we may already be in the soup?
Yeah.
Could you explain what he means by too late, and too late for what? To preserve the world as we know it today?
Yes.
Our societies as they are today, or life itself?
No, too late to avoid major trauma, major die-off, major calamity, perhaps social unrest, massive climate migration, for instance. You would know probably that the armed forces in the United States thinks that climate change and environmental effects are probably the most serious concern about peace. That is those frictions, those pressures, threaten the peaceful operation that we've known by and large, other than our wars and the major world wars in our time. And so what I think he's suggesting is perhaps we're already too far down the line to avoid that. And if that's the case, what does it say? He speaks of palliative hope, and in an active hope kind of way. How should we react? How should we, who care for the common good, who care for the future, who have a altruistic view of caring for all of creation, how should we think? How should we behave? How should we react to the position that we're in?
That's a lot.
I'd like to share something.
Please.
So there are apparently, I read, 100 million displaced people or refugees in the world today. Much of that is already being driven by climate change. And of course, we're amidst a mass extinction that is well underway. One thing I was thinking, though, is that while I agree that religion is complicit in the thought that led us to where we are today, it's also, I think, worth remembering that climate change and the other environmental problems are kind of unforeseen consequences of the Industrial Revolution that started a couple of hundred years ago. Nobody envisioned that, of course, at the time that this started. And I mean, it doesn't really change the circumstances we're in now, but it's not as though there was an ideology driving us off the edge of a cliff that we had foreknowledge of. And so it's just worth thinking about it in those terms as well, I think.
Marcus, I think that's very well taken. I don't think we even remotely were forecasting or thinking about the longer term.
Yeah.
And I think that, for instance, we see in indigenous wisdom thinking about how, I'm told, and I've read about how they thought of the impact of what they were doing in their societies for 7 generations forwards.
That's right.
We think quarter to quarter. We
Yeah.
think, and I came out of the investment world and worked for a couple of Fortune 500 companies, and we're driven by the regular metrics of, if not day to day, quarter by quarter, or year by year, without almost any thought of what is the overall impact of the whole system of doing that. In other words, we're just plying our trade in a particular industry, particular company, particular situation without regard to the whole system. Yeah. And I think we're just now becoming really aware and conscious of the whole system. Yeah. And even the word of environment was a strange word that came up, and people, environment was our next door neighbor or the field behind us. Okay, maybe the stream or the nearby woods or some preserve. But the idea that we're of Gaia, the whole living, like the earth as a living organism, a whole organism, a single whole unified organism is very recent in thought development and articulation. So I think that what Tim's book is about, and I'm sorry that he may in fact not be able to join us tonight, but we'll reschedule, is that it makes it very reflective in terms of thinking, as was referenced earlier, about the wisdom to contemplate where we really are today, what narratives, religious, spiritual, whatever they are, and we have to point to Western European and U.S. as prime drivers of capitalism and the economic system and economic growth, which has taken people out of misery, which taken people out of poverty. Lots of great effects. But like anything, extended to its extreme becomes a disability, becomes a devastating potential. And our goal as an organization, SSGN, Spirituality and Sustainability Global Network, is to network people who have taken account in a dispassionate or passionate way where we are situated today and look for the spiritual call to move in a different constructive direction. And to what Tim's book talks about is when we deal with the grief of the recognition of how difficult a situation we are, we have to suffer that grief. We have to deal in the realities before we can perhaps select a wiser and more sensible approach to our situation.
One other aspect is in terms of the overall situation is that I kind of see technology, a metaphor for the situation is kind of like a noose that's tightened. Technology enabled population to explode by making food resources much more widely available. And now we find ourselves at the threshold of what, is no longer really sustainable. So it, I think people are starting to revisit some of Thomas Malthus's ideas as being perhaps ultimately viable. telling in terms of the situation we're in. And one other thing, David Corton, I'm sure you're familiar
Yes.
with, when corporations rule the world is all about these things that you're talking about. So.
Yes, yes.
Well, and that's really what's happened. We don't even have just international companies. We have companies that are well larger than individual countries. We have massive, and in fact, their operation is to compete on a worldwide basis and to be, in effect, economies of their own. Now, a couple other people have raised their hands. Sharon Joy Kleitz,
Sharon
I see.
Joy.
Hello there. Hi. And Sheila, thank you for bringing up the Deep Time Network and how your work relates with it. Ensign, I put the link in the chat, but that's Orla. That's Orla's thing. And Bill Bilodeau and Linda Sechrist took the course this past semester. I just wanted to flag that. Joe, I wanted to respond to something you said earlier about how this economic model just requires perpetually being fed. And that really it's part of the narrative that we've not looked at as closely as I think our consciousness is allowing us to now, is that we're really here to serve one another. And I think that goes back to where I heard Ensign describing. I personally believe we're in a cycle of evolutionary maturity into a more widely acceptance of we are one another, and serving one another is serving ourselves as well. And you asked for, I think, signals, and I looked for signals and metaphors and clues. And I would say one clue was COVID. When the question is, what do we do? And what we all did was we slowed down and we rediscovered relationships. We rediscovered how beautiful what our surroundings were. I feel that was a catalyst of this spiral dynamics, perhaps, of awakening to, as you also said, Ensign, the wisdom to contemplate where we are today.
Well,
and I believe part of what we're doing is right now telling bits of stories. And I go back to that word, reflections on the narrative. Maybe it's just like sometimes you color with a pencil and something other that was hidden before comes up. You know, that impressed writing is maybe in some of these stories, these narratives, the real truth wasn't ready to come up till we were at this place of ability to notice the wisdom in ourselves. And I believe there is in my, again, collecting clues, an ongoing affirmation of our common humanity that is really quite beautiful right now. So thanks for listening.
Yes.
Please, other folks who would like to speak up. Sheila, you want to say something again?
Yeah, I just wanted to steer the conversation back to
on mute. A lot of people are on mute.
Oh, yeah. Natasha, can you unmute everybody? But please be careful if there's noise in the background, mute yourself.
May I proceed?
Please.
I just wanted to steer the conversation back to what do we do if we are in an irreversible collapse situation? And the name of that person who works with this is Carolyn Baker. But it has to do with raising awareness about what we're grieving and how to do it, how to be fully present, to listen and to help contain and support the integration of grief. And that grief, not to be a downer, but it needs to be recognized that there is womb life grief and ancestral grief that gets passed down epigenetically through the line.
Right.
So we have to broaden our understanding of how to do that, how to be present, how to be. Francis Weller's work is beautiful on this, on grief.
you mentioned the word collapse, and I think that's a very good word to focus on. What does that mean to us, and what is our response if we really embrace the potential for major calamity and say we're in that trajectory, and what is our appropriate response?
Ensign, I think Gary Robbins wanted to speak.
Please.
Gary?
Yes, Sheila mentioned Carolyn Baker, and she's co-author with Andrew Harvey of a book that is really powerful, and it's called Radical Regeneration, Birthing the New Human in the Age of Extinction. And to give you an idea of where they're headed is that they believe that we are almost certainly in the stages of way beyond being able to save ourselves. And I don't think they've said that quite that clearly, but they're certainly expecting that we will get there and that all kinds of turmoil will be and devastation will happen on the earth. And they find it necessary at the beginning of their book to have 3 essential spiritual definitions. And they define transformation, transfiguration, and transmutation. And they believe that through all of the trials and tribulations ahead for mankind is the possibility that we will be able to, in a sense, graduate into a new species, which carries our current development into something as different from where we are today to where we are going, as from the image of Christ and the earliest of humanoids on the planet. And it's fascinating to me. I have no idea. I'm not into all that religious kind of stuff, but I think that we all know that through trials and tribulations, we are able to grow. And maybe as a species, we will be able to develop something much better than what we have, because goodness knows that the way that we are acting today, where we can't even take care of the planet that is the golden egg for us, I don't know how we can expect to survive.
I wonder if I could make a comment. I think that Joseph made some interesting points on the transformation of the economy that's going to be needed if we're to survive. And also Marcus mentioned some very interesting economic points. And of course, David Korten, I was very impressed by David Korten's analyses. And he actually spoke at the Assisi conference last year that Elisabetta had arranged. And I would like to say that some of the thoughts I've been giving is, how do we transform our economies so that it can be sustainable, and also to restore nature. I think that one idea is the development of more local sustainable communities, and also cooperative models. We have socialism and capitalism as competing models, but cooperative models have been more or less forgotten. And this is a potential alternative. And involved with this is not just the economy in a traditional sense, but also the restoration of our traditional crafts and arts that can provide more depth and richness to us as human beings, which has been lost in people go down the rabbit hole of the internet, and sometimes they lose their cultural roots. By cultural roots, I mean the positive cultural roots, whether it be, when I say the arts are such a diverse source of creative energy, whether it be dance or music or art or sculpture or a whole wide variety of things that we've tended to lose touch with our roots. So also talking about roots, we also have to restore, as Ensign said, the soil. The soil is eroding. And so the healing of the earth could actually provide, an economic focus for us. As an example, in Japan, before the industrialization of the Edo period during the 19th century, mid-19th century, 80% of the economy was involved with the 4 R's. So maybe we have to look at that. So just some ideas, because I think it's important that we start to give thought to how we can restore our local sustainable communities. And this has to do with, of course, even simple things like food. I remember someone explaining, I think it was Dr. Joe Holland explained that he had done an analysis and that as New York City is actually, if there was any major catastrophe, they would only have a very short period, a short window of food supply. Because even during the Depression, apparently there were closer sources of food, but our sources of food have become further and further distant, which creates a great vulnerability for us as well. So by healing the earth, I think we can also heal ourselves and restore our economy.
In a spiritual book reading group that I'm involved in, we're reading a book entitled Zen and the Art of Saving the Planet. And one of the fundamental premises of it is to start transform ourselves. And as Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. And I think this personal transformation, personal consciousness, personal dedication to the cause of ecological stability, ecological harmony with the natural world is something that we need to be more widely embraced throughout the culture, and to go away from the historical culture that we've grown up with, which is the consumer growth, looking for material goods and services to make us happy and for human flourishing, and to go back to much more fundamental ideas about relationship and love and kindness and behaviors that, by all the studies of psychology, suggest to lead to true peace, true happiness, true human flourishing.
Good.
Other comments? Please, Joseph.
Well, this is such a rich conversation, and everything that I've heard tonight is very worthwhile. What can we learn from recent events? And I appreciate Sharon Joy's bringing up the pandemic, the recent pandemic that we're still feeling the results of. Some of the things that we learned there was that we have an economic system where there are some people who are going to fall through the cracks when these pandemics happen. And the people who died in large numbers were people who are on the lower end of the economic scale. We also learned that the people whom we consider the low-paid workers of the world are doing the essential work, and we recognize that the work that they were doing was essential for the economy and the society to keep moving. For me, that gives us an idea of the direction that we need to move in if we're going to have a sustainable world. I don't think any of us would agree with a world that is sustainable if there's great economic injustice and inequalities, as the COVID epidemic exposed in our country. So how do we, as a people who are concerned this way, inject these concerns into the upcoming presidential election? How do we get our political leaders, so to speak, to start talking about these things rather than some of the peripheral issues that they bring up? How do we change the dialogue in this country in order to talk about the reality of our economic situation, the need for economic equality in order for us to be able to sustain the planet? Pope Francis, in his encyclical Laudato Si, certainly points the way. He doesn't detail everything, and it wouldn't be appropriate for the church to do that. But yet, he points out some of the issues that we need to be concerned about. In his phrase, we must pay attention to the cry of the poor and the cry of the earth. So, how do we do that in an immediate way because time is short?
Well, I think one of the answers, Joseph, is those who have become aware, who are concerned, to make our voices heard and to help other peoples to come to that understanding. And I want to reference an interesting document. Jim and I went to a conference in Winter Park with the Earth Charter, and we have Amanda Bennett, if she'd be willing to speak up to a little bit about the Earth Charter, which, like Laudato Si, is an overarching kind of principles of human operation in a way for peace and justice and cooperative operation of the worldwide economic system. And unless we have those kind of principles, those kind of goals, those kind of ideals, those kind of structural notions, we are likely to go to what I call the Lord of the Flies effect, which is simply to be protective of our own little nest. And as some rich people have done, take over silos, of ICBM missiles and make them so that they're going to be sustainable in a little environment, like a little local biosphere. Can you imagine that being a satisfactory life? I can't imagine, but that's a survivalist approach rather than a community approach. Amanda, would you be willing to comment on the Earth Charter?
She may be muted.
Oh, here she is.
Hi, everyone.
Oh,
Thanks,
yeah, there. Hi, Amanda.
Hi. Well, I just wanted to remind you all that the last webinar we had was with Dr. Rick Clugston, and he gave us a really nice presentation on the Earth Charter. So that's on the SSGN YouTube. And I think, well, so the Earth Charter was launched in the year 2000. So it's already been 24 years since it was launched, almost over 30 years since people were thinking about like coming together, coming up with an Earth Charter. So like a document that brought together different values from different world visions of the world. And I think it goes along with the title of the book about time and how we're running out of time, because we can't keep having the conversation over and over again. Like, what is important to us? We know what's important to us. And so like the Earth Charter outlines these values and these principles, and then that has inspired people around the world to also come up with goals. So we have the Sustainable Development Goals, but I feel like the closer we get to the deadline of 2030 to achieve these goals, the less we pay attention to them, because we're just giving up on them because we think, okay, yeah, we're not going to achieve them by 2030. So what's next? Let's have some more conferences and come up with new goals. So I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about time, especially with what's been going on in the past 2 months in the US. What's going on this week? Everyone is just so distracted all the time with the latest headline. We still have the war. The war is going on. Like Bibi Netanyahu is in Washington, D.C. And I read a headline today that was like, he's in D.C., but Americans are too distracted right now for his visit. So it's like, we're just so distracted and running out of time for climate action and everything. But we already have like all these blueprints, like the Earth Charter, bringing us together and like showing us what we have to do. So I don't know. I think that's why young people around the world are so frustrated too. That's why it feels like we keep having generational divides and blaming each other. But I think we also have hope that we can come together,
Do you think the pressures as they get greater are leading us towards cooperation, or are they working the opposite?
I
in
think it's
terms of
working the opposite. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate thing. Yeah, it may be that we become more tribalistic, more survivalist oriented, rather than look at, as COVID, we realized that we were all in the soup together, and if we didn't take care as an overall system, that we risk greater problems. And I thought we might come away from that as a worldwide experience, thinking more constructively on a worldwide basis. But unfortunately, as you say, the current wars that are underway and so forth get us back again to regional, right now, spontaneous, not spontaneous, but immediate kind of problems, and we lose track of where the overall objective, where the overall goal. And that's why we talk about make it sacred. Make the earth sacred. Make me that the starting ground, and everything else flow from that, as opposed to making GDP growth by quarter sacred, which has no qualitative measures, no externalities taken into account. Is we could be poisoning the earth, but as long as we have growth in doing it, it's acceptable because there is no qualitative measures, no long-term measures. And we have to change that narrative, change that orientation. And I think that comes from each of us exercising our voice in the political system and otherwise to maximum extent. And I think conversations like this and other conversations where people really have to think deeply and to have to speak with each other and think from a longer term perspective. Think about, if you don't have grandkids, think about future people and future situation that touch your heart, because only if it touches your heart. And that was where the Assisi conferences started out, is that the need for what we would call transformational education that will reach people's heart and really call them to be active, the voice of sustainability, the voice of regeneration, the voice of caring for the future. And from a spiritual standpoint, from a pragmatic standpoint, from an intergenerational standpoint, that's what we need. And we're but a very small voice in it, but we're so appreciative that you all have come today to talk together and share this together and hopefully bring other people into the mix.
True. Excellent. Excellent. Excellent.
I have listened to these conversations, and I also thought that I should have a little contribution to make, looking at it from the perspective, really, truly, of such a rich conversation that we have. I've not read the book. I want to start on that, but I am more or less thinking about it more in terms of a cultural wisdom, tradition, understanding. Being an African and the way we have come to grow up, we've come to discover, especially from our own African traditional roots and background, that it starts first of all from an appreciation greatly of what we call memories. And I've been a student of memory for a very long time. So what are the kinds of memories that we have grown up with? And I have seen that we have reconstructed them in different ways, where we have analyzed and spoken of very well the last few minutes of sharing and conversation. But for me, where we have grown was, first of all, realizing that we were a group that had a lot of rituals that celebrated humanity, to guard and protect and spiritualize the whole human person. And for us, that element is so strong that when we begin to think of how we destroy the earth and destroy our society and community and all of that, we grow up knowing that it is a mix that affects collectively everybody in our community. So what are the kinds of memories that we want to set forward? This is the reason why when Annie started saying we speak in terms of 7 generations, That's how our rituals, that's how our tales, that's how our stories, and the way we communicated that, that's how it grew with our population. Because when you do something today that affects one aspect of life, it's going to affect the other aspect of life. There's going to be a famine in society. And the famine is going to act that our children will die. And there will be hunger. Then there will be punishment from the gods, you know. So that's the language of culture. Okay. So how are we going to resolve that? Well, we have to appease the spirit world so that the spirit world will be able to tell us how we can appease them. So we go back to our cultural totems, you know, we go back to our cultural rituals. So all I'm saying is that this element, this growth element of culture and wisdom should show us, or showed us on how we grow up in society to respect the earth, to trust that we have been given a responsibility to not just live here, but also to guard and protect, you know. And it's more in a spiritual realm. And if society is failing today, it's not because we are failing and that we have grown in GDP. It's mainly because we have failed to recognize that these rituals in themselves affect us in different ways and build memories that continue to affect us in the wisdom traditions. So they are always asking, our elders are asking, there's nothing that happens as an accident. Everything has a cause. There is a reason for why it has happened. If we tell a lie, then the lie will affect us on the global nature. If we do something that will hurt relationships and neighbors, then it will affect us in the farms. It will affect the way our children are going to grow up. It will also affect the way we are going to interact with one another. It may look like I'm just throwing out some rambles, but that is the way I think going forward that we should visualize the conversation. It's such a way that we have to learn how to preserve and guard this wonderful gift that God has given us. And to be able to recognize that every time we miss out in those rituals, they will affect us. They will affect us in different ways. So I am looking at it from that background of culture and wisdom traditions that we have used, and hoping that our memories of these wisdom traditions and how we react to those memories can help us reconstruct in very, very concrete terms how to guard and preserve this flourishing earth that we have. I hope that I've been able to say a few things. That's
very good, Donald. And I think you referenced responsibilities, and that references stewardship in my mind. And I think that's an essential principle that has been diminished. We grew up with a notion of competition and survival of the fittest rather than cooperativeness. And as your shirt says, the blessedness of where we are. And we've operated out of a scarcity mentality rather than an abundance mentality. And that scarcity mentality leads us to operate in a defensive way, as though we are not able to share, that we're not able to rely on abundance, and we have a bad mindset. And so the mindset has to change. And I think you're referencing to the wisdom traditions and the wisdom of past generations, but that were more considerate, perhaps, of the fragility of the overall system that we've sort of taken for granted. And one of the interesting things I think was in the movie, like Don't Look Up, or so another movie, very popular movie, and they were talking about, well, we got to science the shit out of this. We got to technology the heck out of it. We're gonna fix it with technology. Everything will, you know. And I admire Bill Gates. I admire his efforts. But the idea that we're going to solar panel and electric vehicle our way out of excess of human impacts on the biosphere is a false god in my mind. And I think we have to get wise and smart about what is compatible human operation in the biosphere look like, and as the Earth Charter would have us, with the principles and concepts of peaceful and equitable operation of the Earth, and the sustainable development goals that point to measurement in ways that are sensible, that relate to sustainability and economic long-term ecological viability are the heart of where we have to keep moving. And I think there's every hope that we can wise up, show up, wise up, and do the right thing. I think we're about coming to the end of our time. Please, anybody that has not had a chance to offer something into the mix, please take this opportunity.
Okay.
Anyone else? Any hands raised or anything? I don't.
Joseph has his, yeah.
Joseph, you're muted, Joseph.
He's
Unmute.
muted.
I appreciate your pep talk at the end of things here. And I hope you're right. But we seem to, when you say we, you seem to be ignoring the 60 million Trump voters in this country. And let's hope it's not 60 million and one. But I just present that as a caveat to Rachel Solness and her wonderfully expressed hopium. Thank you. I hope to come back to this. I kind of stumbled on it and I got ADD and they've checked the mild cognitive impairment box, which actually helps when you ignore it. Actually, the best thing that happened 2 days ago was I put my New York Times subscription on a 2-month hold and I felt better immediately.
That's a good idea.
Yep. And as you can see, humor is my coping skill for all situations. So I could hold the mic for the next hour and a half and get some more laughs, but blessings to you all.
Yes, likewise. And thanks so much for attending, for everybody. And we will get Tim Beal back for another time. And thanks so much for everybody's participation. And keep the faith and keep hopeful and keep active.
And
as Joanna Macy would have it, active hope.
Ensign, can you stay on the call just for a minute after everyone leaves so I can get some local information?
Sure. And I'd just like to say that I'd like to express my thanks to Natasha, who's assisted us so ably with our operations today. And we also have a program on August the 20th with the author and medical professor Stephen Post, who will speak about his role as the co-founder with Sir John Templeton of the Institute for Unlimited Love. And as Ensign says, we're going to we'll get hold of Stephen Post and we'll work out the problems. And I think it'll be great to have him come back in the light of our conversation. We've established a good basis.
You mean Tim Beal? Yeah.
Tim Beal. Yeah.
Yeah.
When is the next meeting? When is the next meeting?
August the 20th.
Okay, great.
And you'll now be on our mailing list, so you'll be aware.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Peace, everybody.